China takes control of a Sri Lankan port on one of the world's busiest shipping routes. It's all part of its ambitious plan to create a new Silk Road. But Sri Lanka's powerful neighbour, India, is worried. So can the island nation balance the desires of two Asian giants? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, both countries are calling it a win-win. Sri Lanka, struggling to pay its debts, has signed a huge port deal with China, which will give it a foothold in the busy sea lanes between Asia and Europe. China has paid a little over $1 billion to take a 70% stake in the Hambantota port on Sri Lanka's southern coast. Now, the facility, which was built with Chinese loans, has been running at a loss since its opening 6 years ago. Beijing's growing influence in Sri Lanka is making neighbouring India anxious because it considers the Indian Ocean region to be its backyard. Minel Fernandez has more now from Colombo, where the deal was signed.
And the ink is dry on this agreement, which has been many months in the making, lots of negotiations in recent months, essentially to lease out the Hambantota port on the southern coast of Sri Lanka to the Chinese. Now, it's for a period of 99 years where the Chinese will operate and run this port for them. It's very much part of its New Silk Road initiative, which aims to look at ports and road connections between Europe and China. So this is very strategic for the Chinese. In turn, for the Sri Lankans, it's a way of trying to cut off some of the debt which is really crippling the government. A lot of this debt taken on by the previous regime of Mahinda Rajapaksa to build infrastructure, to build roads, to build ports, airports and the like. But the present government is finding that it has to take some key decisions or face huge financial issues.
Well, as Minel mentioned there, this is all part of the so-called New Silk Road. China calls it the project of the century, an initiative to build trade and transport links across Asia and beyond with a large rollout of Chinese-built facilities. And the port company says Sri Lanka's playing a strategic role. Also known as the One Belt, One Road plan, it was unveiled by China's president 4 years ago. 68 countries are involved in it, representing around 60% of the world's population, and that's about a third of global GDP. It includes land routes like rail lines linking China to Europe, Laos and Thailand. It also has sea routes. China has bought ports in Turkey, Pakistan and now Sri Lanka to give it greater access to the oil-rich Middle East. And it's creating new joint industrial parks in Malaysia and Belarus. OK, let's bring in our guests now. In Beijing, we have Aina Tangen, a political affairs analyst and China specialist. In Colombo, we have Namal Rajapaksa, who's a member of the joint opposition in Parliament and son of the former Sri Lankan President, Mahinda Rajapaksa. Finally, we have Ambassador K.C. Singh, who's a former secretary with the Indian Ministry of External Affairs. He also served as ambassador to the UAE and Iran. So thank you all very much for joining us. Can I start with you, Namal Rajapaksa, in Colombo, because, of course, this port, Hambantota, which we are discussing today, is in your constituency. The government has said this is a win-win situation. You must be delighted.
Well, I mean, first of all, I must say that the people are very concerned about the terms of this agreement, because we believe, and the people of Sri Lanka believes that the terms and conditions that this agreement is being signed is not in the best interest of Sri Lanka. And also, I must bring into your attention that at the moment there is a Supreme Court case going on.
What are the specific concerns?
I'll get into that, but yes, of course. I mean, I'll get into that level. I'll get into that bit later. But at the same time, there's a Supreme Court case going on against this particular agreement that has been signed apparently that has been signed today with China Merchant Company. Well, see, when you look at the specific concerns that we have, Port Authority itself has clearly said that out of these two particular proposals that has been submitted by two Chinese companies, the company that this government has signed today is not in the best interest of the port authority, because Hambantota port as a strategically developed port and a strategically important port being controlled by a private company is a bit concerned by the national security aspect and also by the Sri Lankan people of Sri Lanka. And at the same time, the government hasn't got involved with solving out the labor issues. Because the Sri Lankan law says before you transfer any company to a different shareholder or before you transfer the ownership, that they have to get approval from the Labour Ministry regarding the future of the trade unions and also the people who work there.
All right. So,
but overall,
so just to clarify then. Sorry, Mr. Rajapaksa, just to clarify then, there are two major concerns.
Yes,
that is something that the trade unions have taken up. They're not happy with the arrangements for labour to work in this port and the projected industrial complex that they're hoping to build. And the other thing is you fear that this has been sold off effectively to a private company. Is that what your concern is?
Yes, talking about the labour, the government or the private sector company hasn't had any negotiations with the trade unions as to what is going to happen to them or to their future in the first place. At the same time, the government of Sri Lanka promised that this particular agreement will be tabled in the parliament and then debated about it and then take the concerns of the people, the opposition and all the respective political parties and then decide on what terms and conditions that they're going to agree upon.
All right,
but the government said, but if you look at the actual component of this contract, the majority controlling right of this port will be with the private company.
All right, so sorry, there is a delay on the line to Colombo, but thank you very much. Let's go to KC Singh in New Delhi. How is the Indian government regarding this development? This is a rescue package, effectively, to what has been a failing enterprise for more than 5 years.
Well, it ties in what India has said about the Belt and Road Initiative, that many of these ventures are not being entered into by China by looking at their financial viability. And this is going to be a standing example for the other countries to watch, including Pakistan, because China is not Father Christmas handing out dollar bills. They want return on their money and they want the money to come within a certain certified period. But Indian concern, of course, this is a brainchild of President Rajapaksa's government. India was very concerned then. But the present government has done two things. It has balanced that by giving India more access to a port called Trincomalee, where there are 99 tanks. Companies were earlier handling 15, and we are getting access to 74 more. So that kind of balances India and China in terms of how Sri Lanka wants to do it. But other thing they've done is they've said that one of the conditions is that no military naval vessel, Chinese naval vessel, will come to Hambantota without the permission of the government. Now this is at least to some extent should satisfy government of India. But naturally India would keep a wary eye on it because it's a 99-year lease. And that's a very, very long lease. And 15,000 acres given out to China in that place as part of the Belt and Road Initiative raises very important strategic questions.
And let's go to Aina now in Beijing. Why is it that almost everything the Chinese do is met with a certain suspicion, if not downright hostility? Because you can hear that it sounds as though there's almost a rekindling of Sino-Indian rivalry again.
Well, there are a lot of reasons. Obviously, there are rivalries regionally and globally with the U.S., regionally with both Japan and India. But I think we should concentrate on what's at stake here. Badly needed infrastructure. This was an idea that was hatched within Sri Lanka. It was paid for by Chinese financing. And now at this point, China is saying, look, this didn't work out the way it was supposed to. You know, there's 36,000 ships that pass this port every year. And since 2015, only 44 have made it into this port. The port was obviously made to be an important center for bunkering and for industry and trade. But I think it's been used as a political football within Sri Lanka in terms of local politics. And now China, who is very sensitive to this issue of having projects that work, especially things that are so key and important to the Belt and Road Initiative, and they want to see this right. So they have stepped in. They're going to put in an additional $1.2 billion to make this port viable. Now, if it fails, it'll be China's failure and it'll be China's losses. And this is one way of bailing out the existing government and allowing them to retain 30% of whatever happens. 30% of something good is better than 100% of something that's losing money, as it has been for quite some time.
Can I take that thought and then put that to Namal Rajapaksa? Because, Namal, we've already heard it was your father that initiated this whole process of negotiating with the Chinese for this port facility. Isn't it better that the people of your constituency in southern Sri Lanka are part of this project rather than something that has been failing miserably for the last 5 or more years?
Well, I must say that we have nothing against the investment that coming into this country. We want Chinese investors to come in. We want Indian investment to come in. We want to create jobs. We want to make sure that the Sri Lankan people are benefited. But I must also say that this port was constructed 4 years ago. Of course, it was constructed 4 years ago, and it was developing at a reasonable pace. Because if you look at China Harbour itself was on a SOT agreement with Sri Lankan government during our government for a terminal management. So we went into agreements that are favourable for the Sri Lankan government and for the people of Sri Lanka. The concern is not about the investment coming in. And it's not about, it may be a geopolitical, it may be the government has to give the Trincomalee oil tanks to India and then give the Hambantota port to China to make sure that the geopolitical aspect of it looked after. But from my perspective, I represent my people. I represent people of Hambantota. I represent people of Sri Lanka. Our concern is how beneficial it can get for the people of Sri Lanka. Of course, commercial-wise, one would argue for the best. I mean, one would debate, one would negotiate for the best deal for them. But the government, I'm not saying that the Chinese government is wrong. I'm not saying that the Indian government is wrong. I'm saying the Sri Lankan government should have negotiated a better deal for Sri Lanka. Because if you actually look at these two proposals, okay, just for a second, we'll say the Hambantota port, the government has to go with one of the Chinese companies. But at the same time, there were two proposals given. One is from China Merchant, one is from China Harbour.
Well, the
Sri Lankan Port Authority itself, has clearly stated that this particular agreement is not in the best interest of the Sri Lankan Port Authority compared to the other agreement that was given by another Chinese company.
Clearly, there's still a lot of debate to be had in Sri Lanka. Let's go to Casey Singh in New Delhi. And I'm just wondering about how does India feel about this overarching aim that has come from President Xi? He wants this huge global system in place, a network in place that will revive China's slowing economy. How does New Delhi feel, particularly when they thought that Mr. Sirisena, when he came to power, was focusing much more on New Delhi and the West?
Well, India was one of the very few countries which did not attend the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative forum meeting in Beijing. And the reason that we didn't do that was we were objecting to the China-Pakistan economic corridor passing through Gilgit-Baltistan, on which India lays a claim. So we said there are sovereignty issues there. You can't have a Belt and Road Initiative which doesn't take into consideration A, financial viability, and two, sovereignty issues or sovereign concerns of other countries, something that China doesn't care much about in South China Sea. So when it comes to other countries, it must show the same sensitivity. But I think from a strategic point of view, for them to come in and first invest, and then when they're not getting a return, turn that into a permanent footprint is a bit ironical. It's what the Western powers did in Hong Kong and Macau. So the Chinese are doing a similar kind of thing. Is it a model then for future expansion of Chinese strategic footprint? When people can't return the money, countries can't return the money, then you grab territory. So that would be something that India would be concerned about, and I'm sure it'll be raised in Colombo. But we would also be keeping a watchful eye on how it's spanning domestically. As Mr. Rajpaksa is pointing out, the unions are objecting, and as yet there are villages which are going to be displaced because 15,000 acres is a huge chunk of land. So let's how it plays out domestically in Sri Lanka.
And Aina Tangan, I'm just wondering how this, what's the word, perhaps apprehension, trepidation even, that we're hearing coming from New Delhi and indeed from certain sectors of Sri Lanka, how this is going down in Beijing, and is this likely to dent China's ambition? As you just heard, there are suspicions that this is another form of Chinese colonialism, if you like, replacing that of the West of 100 years ago.
Well, from Beijing's point of view, they're not pushing any kind of ideology or religion. They simply say, internal affairs are your own business. Now, in terms of India, India was quite, open to try to put that kind of investment in, to try to help its neighbors stand up. If they are concerned about China's influence, I suggest they come to the table. As they say, money talks and the rest of it walks. So I think when we start looking at the situation, we should separate kind of the passive-aggressive ideas about China's expansion and concentrate more on what exactly the world needs. We are surrounded by all sorts of disunity, discord, wars. Isn't it about time that leaders sat down and tried to work out? I don't understand why India boycotted the Belt and Road Initiative. I think it is a mistake to judge your entire foreign policy based on one issue, the relationship with Pakistan. China cannot change that. That is something that will have to come between Pakistan and India. So at this point, I would like to hear some positive ideas about how this can do. I think China has stepped up to the plate. The question is, what does India want to do?
Casey Singh, back in Delhi then, is it just a case of sour grapes, perhaps envy, the fact that India has missed an opportunity which China has seized upon?
No, not really. I think India's, as I said, the Sri Lankans have welcomed us into Trincomalee. We are going to have a huge oil storage facility there, which is of interest to us. And I don't think India has the kind of global share of global trade where it can handle effectively a port which is at the junction of East-West trade. As it is, I think the example given from Beijing was, why haven't the ships come in? Is it only a question of management, or is it a larger question that they are skipping that point because freight is just not required to be located there? So if the Chinese come in, they'll have to come in then with an economic zone, with industry. That's why they want 15,000 acres, which if it is peaceful, if it helps Sri Lanka, sure, it's very good. But at the moment, that's not the impression that India has. We find that China is jostling for strategic space, beginning with South China Sea, on the continental side where our borders are concerned. I think China has to begin showing sensitivity, or it'll run into the kind of domestic problems it's seeing in Sri Lanka and other places too.
And Namal Rajapaksa in Colombo, you obviously know that you are sandwiched effectively by two Asian giants, aren't you? But ultimately, it's the people of Sri Lanka that have to be satisfied. Given that Sri Lanka has a total debt of 64 billion, 95% of that of government revenue is used to service that debt. And last year, only $300 million worth of foreign direct investment was attracted by Sri Lanka. I mean, in many ways, Sri Lanka should be grateful, shouldn't it?
Of course, I mean, we are always grateful to Chinese government and also the Indian government, because I must say when my father came into office, the Chinese government helped us tremendously to defeat terrorism and also to develop infrastructure.
Yeah, but your father was criticised for huge borrowing from China, wasn't he? Your father was criticised for borrowing more than $6 billion from China.
It's the way you think, but end of the day, today, for this current government was able to negotiate or deal with the Indian government or the Chinese government for a port because my father built it. We developed infrastructure. Today, Hambantota port is valuable not only because of the geopolitical aspect of it and also the location, but also the infrastructure that we had developed around it. The Mattala airport, the highway system, the road network, the infrastructure. Every single dollar that we have borrowed has been invested for people of Sri Lanka, which gives a value addition for Sri Lankans. But at the end of the day, I must say that the Sri Lankan government should think about the Sri Lankan policies first and the interest of people of Sri Lanka. I mean, it's much more easy to say that it's very difficult to manage this, so we might as well sell this to someone who is neighboring us or someone who can manage it. But at the end of the day, we have to look at few generations ahead, a long years to come in, the next generations. It's always a government should make policies for the future. It's easy to sell things off and then sit back and say, listen, we have done our part of the job and now it's all done. No, the difficult part is to develop the infrastructure, and we have done it. And we have also got into agreements with the Chinese companies, like China Harbour at one point for Hambantota Port, as I mentioned earlier, even Colombo South Port. And of course, even certain Indian companies were very interested in investing in Hambantota. See, it is the end of the day, it is how we Sri Lankan government, our Sri Lankan government approach the international community.
Indeed.
It's easy to say we gave Hambantota to China, so we might as well give Trincomalee to India. Now we are all okay. No, it's not going to be okay from the people's perspective. Trincomalee, still there are a lot of issues in the grassroots level, and the people are very concerned about it. Politicians are concerned about it. Not only the southern politicians, the northern politicians are much more concerned than the southern politicians when it comes to the Trincomalee project, which we have to talk at a different forum.
All right,
but
understood.
I understand the point. 15,000 acres.
Sorry, I understand
the
point you're making. Let's come back to Aina now in Beijing, and I'm just wondering how significant a portion is this Hambantota port on the Indian Ocean? How important a part of this to the overall strategy is this to President Xi's signature policy?
Well, I think it's very important. It's coming at a very early time in the expansion of the Belt and Road Initiative, and therefore they want to make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. As you've pointed out, for 5 years or more, this thing has been kind of a dead duck. It's been bleeding, hemorrhaging dollars, which are being picked up by the taxpayers of Sri Lanka. It's now time to put it on a business footing. Now, the money that's going into it, obviously, is going to be Chinese. So the Chinese are stepping up to the plate. They put the initial money in, and now they're bailing out the local government. I can understand that there's going to be different perspectives based on the parties, opposition and majority, on how this is handled. But I don't think that you can fault China for stepping up and saying we want to put an additional $1.2 billion into this and try to make this actually viable. In the past, there have been many rejections of different things, not only from China, but from the Middle East for oil storage, for bunkering, for sugar processing. Many of these things have been rejected, yet there has been no business. As we said, only 44 ships out of 36,000 that go annually since 2015.
All right.
This is horrendous. Whatever the problem is, somebody has to step in and solve it.
All right. Can I take this opportunity now to say thank you all to our guests. We've run out of time. Aina Tangen, Casey Singh and Namal Rajapaksa, thank you very much indeed. A really interesting conversation. And as ever, thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. If you should want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis. And from me and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.